Hello everyone! Today I want to share with you one game from the recent quarterfinals of the Crypto Cup, one of the Magnus Carlsen's online tournament between Magnus Carlsen himself and Hikaru Nakamura. This match was won on tiebreaks by Magnus Carlsen, but in this particular game, Hikaru Nakamura won this game and with black pieces, and let me show you why this game is so dear to my heart. Okay, so the game started with the Italian game, Gioco Piano. D3 was played, castling, and here white opted for the 6 rook e1. There are many moves, many move orders and nuances in the Italian game. White usually plays c3 or h3, sometimes they opt for a4, they can play bishop g5, and rook e1 is one of the options. The main idea behind this move is to stop black from playing d5 immediately. Actually, in one of my games, I played d5, but this continuation doesn't really quite work here for black, because in this particular situation, the common bishop takes f2 idea that you can see often in the Italian game does not really work very well, because white gets 2 pieces for the rook, and yes, these pieces are not developed yet, but at the same time black doesn't have enough material to start the attack. I tried it. It's not really working, so that's why black has other options. They can either play d6 or even try to make some waiting pawns moves, but there is one very straightforward variation after rook e1, which starts with knight g4, using the fact that this pawn is not on h3, it's not guarding the square g4, and thus the rook is already on e1, thus 2 black pieces can attack f2. After knight g4, white usually continues the game with rook e2, and here black has some ideas. One of the main lines begins with king h8, quite a surprising move, but we see the idea behind this move after h3, which is a normal reply for white in this position. The king is already out of the pin. I mean, this pawn is not pinned anymore since the king has moved to h8, and black can play f5. Taking on g4 is not a good idea here, since after hg, fg, knight, for example, g5, because otherwise black's queen will get to h4, and believe me, the attack will be devastating. After knight g4, however, the position is also very strong for black. For example, they can play g3, using the idea that after knight to f3, they can sacrifice the rook, and again, using this very annoying pin, play queen h4, and checkmate is coming in a few moves. So h takes g4 cannot be suggested for white. Actually, I played 3 games with this move order, with this position on the board. In one of my first encounter, I played against Elizabeth Petz in 2017. She replied with knight to g5. It was a rapid blitz. I calculated for quite a few times. Knight takes f2. Actually, it's a very strong move here. Rook takes f2, bishop takes f2, king takes f2, f takes e4, but in the game I was not sure about the evaluation of this position, since I wanted to play d5, and I didn't quite understand what was going to happen after queen h5, threatening to give a checkmate and at the same time play knight f7 somewhere. But in fact, black can play bishop f5, and after knight f7 check, rook takes f7, queen takes f7, knight d4, bishop takes d5. The position might seem not so clear, but actually there are several moves and several ways for black to get a big advantage, one of them being knight e2 and then taking on d3, for example, or maybe an easier one, bishop g6, forcing the queen away and then grabbing the bishop. Again, these two pieces are not developed. They will get developed eventually, but black has an extra pawn and a better position. So knight takes f2 can easily be suggested here. There are other moves in the game. I played knight to h6, which is a little bit unfortunate. I won the game after a very long battle. In the second game, when this position appeared on the board, one of my opponents played e takes f5. That was the game from the last round of the Women's Blitz Chess Championship in 2017. I took on f2, knight takes f2, rook takes f2, and here both lines are possible. Bishop takes f2 or d5. I took on f2. I played d5, and here my opponent made a mistake. Bishop b3 would have been stronger, where after bishop takes f5, we reach a very interesting position with, again, a rook for two pieces, a rook and a pawn to be precise, for two pieces, but again, this side is not developed. The king is quite weak, and I have a very strong pawn center. But after bishop b5, that happened in the game, I could have get a winning position by playing knight d4 with a very beautiful but quite unexpected idea to give a check. And after king g1 take on d4 with a check, and after king h1 trap the bishop. Suddenly this bishop is being trapped. After c3 I can play queen h4, and there is no way this bishop can get from the pawn on c6. Well, in the game I played a little bit different, but won this game anyway. But getting back to the main topic of my video is the move bishop g5. This one is considered to be the main move in this line. Knight f6 usually is being played, knight c3, d6, knight d5, f takes e4, d takes e4, bishop e6. And we get to the position that happened in the game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, but 1 year before that, in 2020, in the Online Olympiad, this same position appeared in one of my games in the match Russia versus USA, where I played with black pieces against Tatev Abrahamyan. She took on f6 with the knight. Bishop takes f6 is another possibility here for white. After knight takes f6, it was considered the strongest move, theoretically, for black is considered to be bishop takes c4, where after knight takes h7, there are several ways to reach an almost drawish endgame. For example, rook takes f3, bishop takes d8, a very nice temporarily queen sacrifice, bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, rook takes f2. Black's pieces are very strong, and if white will not be careful and will play a queen h5, for example, then discovered check will happen. So it seems as white, the best option for white is to give the queen back. Queen takes f2, but then we reach this endgame, which is, well, a little bit better for white. After all, they have potential passed pawn on the h file, which is always quite dangerous. Another way for black to play is take on e2 and take, well, the position, as you can see, is the same, but just starting with bishop takes e2. But anyway, this line was considered to be the best for black. While I prepared a novelty, a new setup at home. Actually, it was prepared, I think, for the candidates that I played in 2019. I didn't have a chance to use it, but as it often happens, I managed to use it 1 year later in a very important game in the Online Olympiad. I took on f6, g takes f6 with the pawn, and my idea after bishop takes e6 was to take on g5 and then very straightforward play, a very straightforward plan that I had in mind. Queen f6, knight e7, knight g6, getting to f4 and playing h5 and g4 if possible. And my opponent did not play well in this game. She faced this plan for the first time. She played rook d2. Actually, the square is very important and is needed for white queen. As we will see in the game between Carlsen and Nakamura, white put the queen on d2, which is stronger. Queen f6 I played, bishop g4, knight e7, I continue my plan, queen e2, and here I played queen g6 first, because h5 is a very strong threat, and actually the knight is needed here to guard the f5 square, so the bishop is feeling very uncomfortable in there. My opponent played h4, but in fact this loses the game, since after g takes h4, knight takes h4, I have bishop takes f2, and after tricky queen takes f2, of course I don't take on f2 because of this intermediate check, knight takes g6, but instead I grab the bishop, and after queen e1 I play rook f4, my pieces are very nicely placed on the fourth rank, g3, rook takes e4, and I won this game quite easily, quite fast. Also rook f7, I don't really like this move very much. I prefer rook g8 right now, but since it was a team's event, a rapid game, an online game, I decided to play it safe. I played rook f7, then I doubled the rooks on the f file, and after queen takes b7, I opted for rook f2, with the idea after knight g2 to play rook f3, threatening to take on g3, and white cannot really do anything against my attack, which is very strong. That's how the game ended. Tatev resigned because after king f1, rook h1 will follow, the rook is hanging, and checkmate is coming. Back to the game of the pros, to the very top. I was commenting this game live on Chess.com channel, and of course I was happy to see this position because I knew this line and I recalled the games that I played. Magnus, however, did not of course play rook d2. As I said, this square is very important, crucial for the queen. She needs to be here to attack the g5 pawn. He played c3, queen f6, bishop g4, knight e7, you recognize the moves, you know the plan, queen to d2. The pawn is under attack, and now black has a choice, either to protect it with the pawn by playing h6 or by playing rook g8. Hikaru played rook g8, well, he still hopes to prepare h5 and make this move without wasting time on h6, and the rook will be needed on the g file after h5 and possibly g4 in the future. Before Carlsen starts the counter-attack on the queen side, here he played a4. Computer suggests another interesting plan, idea for white, which has a plan of advancing the c pawn, rook c1, c4 and c5, but a4 of course seems to be very natural. a5 stopping white's pawn from advancing even more forward. Queen to a2, queen to g6, a very nice queen's maneuver, queen to e6, and here I don't know why, but Hikaru decided not to play h5. That looked as a very nice trick. The idea is that after queen takes g6, knight takes g6, this pawn cannot be taken due to this fork. So I'm not sure how Magnus wanted to react after h5. Queen takes e7 doesn't seem to be working as well, because the rook will go to g7 and suddenly the white queen is trapped. What else can white do? They can play bishop f5 or try something else such as knight e5, but anyway h5 seemed to be as a logical move. Nakamura played queen to g7, but that seems as a move in the wrong direction, since h5 is no longer possible with the queen on g7 instead of g6. B takes a5, white continues with the play on the queen side. Bishop takes a5, rook b1, and suddenly it's not so clear how to protect this pawn. If black plays bishop b6, rook b6 can be unpleasant. If black plays rook a7, that's the move that Nakamura chose, well, the rook is kind of hanging there, as we will see. There was another move, knight c6, trying for this trick after rook b7, knight d8, but the knight gets away from e7 and thus not guarding the f5 square anymore. The bishop can use the square for the future play. So you see, one move in the wrong direction and the position is not simple and clear anymore. Rook a7 Nakamura played, queen to c4. Back to g6, probably hoping for perpetual, but in fact white has a very nice move, knight d4, using the fact that the rook is misplaced on a7. After e takes d4, the queen comes to d4 with double attack, and if e doesn't take on d4, then the knight can go to f5 or e6 and use the weakness of white squares. Instead, Magnus saw another interesting idea, played rook b5, and his idea was connected with the sacrifice on e5. Instead, he should have just gotten the rook back. He should have moved the rook back to b1, and white has a good position. The d6 and b7 pawns are quite weak, and white's rooks can go from b file to d file and try to attack these weaknesses. Instead, as I already mentioned, the sacrifice of the knight followed on e5, d takes e5, and here rook takes e5 was played. Again, after rook takes a5, rook takes a5, queen b4, the position is still very unclear. White will get back the knight, so it means white sacrificed an exchange. Black's pawns are quite weak. What is more important, that the king is also quite weak, so white has some compensation for the sacrificed exchange. While in the game, I'm not sure what Carlsen missed, but after rook takes e5, a very strong rook d8 appeared on the board. The idea of this move is that after rook takes e7, rook d1 check will follow, king h2, queen d6, double attack, winning the rook and the game. And after rook d8, I think the world champion just realized that his position is absolutely hopeless. Of course, he continued to play and fight, looking for chances to complicate, but it was not enough. It was not enough. Hikaru managed to consolidate the position and even won another piece. Well, rather it was sacrificed, but a very funny endgame appeared on the board with a rook, a knight, and a bishop versus one rook. We did not see the technique of Nakamura with checkmating with a knight and a bishop. I hope all of my spectators know how to do it. That's a very nice trick. Knight takes f3, rook takes c5, knight d2. So two pieces, knight and a rook, appeared on the board. If you haven't tried this new section of chess.com endgame drill, when you have 5 tasks to complete checkmating, to show your checkmating skills and as fast as you can, I recommend you. I recommend it to you right now. You can give it a try. Checkmating opponent's king with a knight and a bishop. It's not so easy as it might seem. And well, it didn't happen in this game since the rook was lost as well, and thus Nakamura won. And well, I'm looking forward for many games with many more games with this line. I hope that you enjoyed this video and my memories of this line of the Italian game that starts after rook e1, knight g4, and then very tricky king h8 and f5 plan. I do recommend you try it on the board if white plays rook e1. I hope to see you soon. I hope that you enjoyed this video, like it, follow my channel, take care, play chess, see you soon.